How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
Marky got with Sharon, and Sharon got Sharia. She was sharing Sharon's outlook on the topic of disease. Mikey had a facial scar and Bobby was a racist. They were all in love with dying, they were doing it in Texas. Tommy played piano like a kid out in the rain, and then he lost his leg in Dallas. He was dancing with the train. They were all in love with dying, they were drinking from a fountain that was pouring like an avalanche coming down the mountain.
I don't mind the sun sometimes, the images it shows. I can taste you on my lips and smell you in my clothes.
What up, everyone? Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a little show I do Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and on Rumble, where we talk about whatever I want to talk about. The cult of the far left, the cult of the far right, the cult of the classical liberals. Everyone's in a cult nowadays. It's important to know which cult you're in, and it's important to know the cults that exist around you. But today we are going to be focusing in on the far left. Reddit right off the bat with a nice super chat. Thank you for putting up with my nonsense in the chat for the few years I've been here. Renan, your contribution to the chat is welcomed and appreciated. And thank you for starting us off. You know, I'm always so much happier on a stream when we get a nice big super chat at the very beginning. And so thank you, Renan, for that. I appreciate you. I appreciate your ongoing support. We are going to be exploring the cult of the far left today because when I logged on to YouTube, on one of my browsers anyway, I was recommended, you can see this is the Carrie stream from yesterday. We don't need to worry about that anymore. We don't need to worry about that. I was recommended this video. The far right's worst nightmare speaks out. And this looks to be an interview with Owen Jones, who I don't know exactly who that is, but his name sounds familiar for some reason. And Judith Butler, our favorite gender activist. And this was just 5 days ago. And so we've been watching some Judith Butler talks lately because Judith Butler is like on a PR tour to try to make people less afraid of gender ideology because of the Trump administration's executive orders. And Judith Butler typically shows up to these interviews and she reads out of her book or she reads off a script and then she answers some questions. And usually she does say crazy things. We have yet to watch a we have never watched one single Judith Butler talk in which there has not been at least one golden nugget of crazy. And we've been watching Judith Butler for a while because Judith Butler is one of course, the patron saints, the founding members of queer theory. She's literally called they, them. We don't misgender on this channel. Judith Butler is not a she anymore. Judith Butler is now a they, them. They, them is considered to be the godparent of queer theory. I can't say godmother. Godparent. God, they, them. I don't know. But Judith Butler's really high up there on the queer theory hierarchy, although they, them wouldn't put it that way. And so I saw this pop up, and this really seems to be more of like, maybe like, is Ben Johnson, is he a socialist? Like, who is this? I feel like we've seen him. Oh, shit. You guys couldn't hear that because I don't have the sound set up. Literally the first thing he said is a specter is haunting the United States. Where does that come from? Anytime you hear a specter is haunting something, where does that come from? Does anyone know? Who is this guy? I feel like I should know who he is, but I don't. I probably should have looked this up before I was live on the internet. Anyway, hang on. Hang on. I now have sound playing on my computer that I don't know where it came from, so hang on. Okay, we're back. Yes, anytime you hear a specter is haunting anything, that is from the Communist Manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe and blah, 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 blah. So that's where that is from. Who is he? Oh my god. This literally just keeps playing without me actually hitting play. So I just wanted to go back to the beginning and to not play. Okay, Owen Jones, can you handle that? Can you handle that while I look at who you are? This is my independent channel, blah, 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 blah. Who are you, though? Who are you, Owen Jones? He is a socialist! I fucking knew it! We've seen this guy before. This guy has interviewed people we've watched before. Socialist, anti-fascist, writer in various places. I knew that. Oh, 1 million followers. Oh, great. So this guy thinks that Judith Butler is our worst nightmare. And so I want to watch the interview that this guy had with Judith Butler. And I want to see if Judith Butler maybe says some things differently in this interview with a famous socialist that maybe she didn't say when she was on stage at the new college in Florida with the sincere approval of Christopher Rufo for some reason, past my understanding. I posted something about him once. He mentioned privatization at home while referring to a Palestinian activist on X. Oh, good. So this is what we're going to be watching today, guys, and we are going to see what Judith Butler had to say. But before we jump into that, I got a couple updates. I have been working, you guys, I know I keep saying this about this little project that I'm working on. For those who don't know, I am writing a dystopia. This is another project that just popped up out of nowhere. It was inspired by a power bigger than me. I promise you that. I am putting the finishing touches on a dystopian fairy tale based on the Communist Manifesto. You can currently read the first 3 acts of it on my Red Menace Collective Substack. That is different from my main Substack. This is the Substack where I write my books, and I publish the drafts early for members of the Red Menace Collective to be able to read them. Act 1, the start of the book, is free for everyone. So you don't have to be a member of the Red Menace Collective. You can just go and read it. Acts 2 and 3 and the coming Acts 4 and 5 are going to be for members only. And I got to tell you guys, I'm really happy with the way this story is turning out. I've made changes to the story even since I published the first chapter. It didn't actually change the first chapter, though. It just changed subsequent chapters. And it's shaping up to be, I think, what might be the best thing I have ever written or will ever write. I don't feel like I'm blowing too much smoke here. It's really good. I was telling Victor about different aspects of the story earlier, and even Victor was like, "Yeah, Carlin, that's like actually a good story." And he wasn't just kissing my ass because he's married to me and he has to make me happy. Like, he was actually, I think maybe my husband was lying to me, but I think he was actually impressed with the story. I don't know. Let me tell you guys about a line. Maybe I'm just making all this up and it sucks. I don't know. But let me tell you about a line today. This is possibly one of my favorite lines I've ever written in my life. So, for context, the idea of the Communist Manifesto, which is, the subtitle is A Revolutionary Fairy Tale, and you can read that in whatever way you want. The idea of this is that this is literally a fairy tale based off of the Communist Manifesto. So what you are in is a fictional environment in which there is an oppressor class in the form of a king and all the king's lieutenants and all the wealthy people, and an oppressed class, which is the class of people that basically exist to make stuff for the king and to make sure the king has all he needs and stuff like that. And so you've got like the bourgeoisie, proletarian kind of like classes that are set up. The proletarian class rises up and rebels against the king, as they would in the Communist Manifesto. And basically there does end up being a communist revolution in the fairy tale. But that's only half the book. After the communist revolution, you start to see the inevitable descent of what communism turns into. And what seemed like a good idea at the time, because there was a group of people starving at the beginning of the story and they were overthrowing the people to get access to the food so they could, not be starving and they could feed their kids and stuff like that. You start to see how what started as, it seemed like a good idea at the time turns into, like, there's some really fucked up shit that happens in this book, okay? There's some really fucked up shit. This is going to be one of the most uncomfortable things people ever read. There have been times when I have been uncomfortable writing it, but then I was like, no, Carlin, you just need to fucking go there. Because here's the thing. I grew up on this dystopian stuff. I've never written a book like this before, but I grew up on this dystopian stuff. I've spent a lot of time in my life reading books like this and thinking about what I would do in books like this and thinking about how sometimes when I read books like this, it left me lacking and I just wanted more and more and more of the messed up stuff because that was what I liked about dystopian books. And so the book has gotten more and more and more crazy. But I think in a good way, in a really good and shocking and deeply uncomfortable way as I've been working on it. And the other thing too is I originally wanted to write a book. When I started the Red Menace Collective, it was almost entirely because I wanted to write a fictional account about the descent into the Marxist utopia. And I had different ideas for it, and I still want to do the other version of the book I had in mind. But you guys got to understand, I've been thinking about some of these ideas for a while, okay? This didn't, like, this, I feel like this is, like, the perfect kind of, like, spark of inspiration to manifest some of these ideas that have literally been in my head for a long time. And so I want to read you one of my favorite things that I've written so far. And this comes from Act 4. Act 4 will be going up on the Substack tonight. It's almost done. It's like this close. I just need to change some things, but it's like this close. This is an actual line. The truly revolutionary citizen, explained the chief of revolutionary health, directs physical energy to ideological advancement rather than selfish biological processes. Sometimes when I write things, I don't know where they come. A lot of times I'm writing stream of conscious. That's just how I write. I write stream of conscious. And sometimes I put something down when I'm just not thinking about it and I'm just trying to go with where my instinct's going. And then I stop and I'm like, I was like, oh damn, Carlin. Oh damn. And you guys are not going to believe what this refers to in the book. Even like, this is one of those moments where I even shocked myself. You have no idea. Sophie is guiding us on this endeavor. Sophie is like the devil on my shoulder. And you guys are going to like everything that we've been talking about for years is coming together in one beautiful mishmash of a story that depicts exactly what communism always turns into. Kazmar, thank you for the super chat. In fighting monsters, how careful must one be to not adopt their methods? Yeah, there are a lot of good lines in there like that. Again, like I'm actually like, I feel like I have vomited every single dystopian thing that's been in my head for like over 3 years into this book, but it all makes sense and it's all working together, and I'm just really, really, really excited about it. So I think Liquid Marble asked, when are you going to release this as a physical copy? I'm going to try to release it on April 1st. Partially because I think that's funny. It's like, is this April Fool's Day? Or did Carlin actually write a fairy tale based on the Communist Manifesto? Like, so I'm targeting April 1st. I think it will be done. Like I said, I'm this close to being done, like, the main... Like, I have the whole story written out. I just need to go through and do a couple edits of, like, the main story. And I do want to do another... like, the draft chapters are basically going to be done, like, tomorrow. So once that point hits, then it's just a matter of like a little bit of editing and refinement, I think. And so I think I will actually be able to get it up as a book by April 1st. That is my intent anyway, just because why not? If it's done, why wait? Why wait, I guess. Yo, my book is so much better than Emmy O'Brien's. It's not even funny. Anyway, if you want to read the book literally as I'm writing it, you can read the first 3 acts right now. Act 4 will be up later tonight, and then Act 5 will definitely be up in the next day or so. That is the main core content of the book. There's some other stuff I'm doing. There's like an appendix, and there's some other things I'm doing that I'm not going to tell you guys about. It's going to be a surprise for when the book actually gets released. But I'm really proud of this project, and I want people to read it, and I think you guys are going to love it, and I want your feedback. And I just there are parts in this book I am dying to tell people about. You guys don't understand. I gave Jennifer a copy kind of like of my outline of this the other day. And I've completely changed the ending since I gave that copy to Jennifer. And so Jennifer has like, I don't even know if Jennifer read it or not, but like I'm dying to tell Jennifer and like everyone else what the surprises are in the book, but I can't because I want you guys to read the book and I want you to go through the journey of the book in the way that I've gone through the journey of writing the book. But I cannot wait to talk about it with you guys. We're going to do a book club out of this book for sure. There is no getting around it. And it's just like, I don't know. Have you guys ever seen me this excited about anything? Seriously, I cannot remember the last time I was like this stupid fuck off excited about anything. And it's just amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, it is the Communist Manifesto, a revolutionary fairy tale. You can find that right now over on the Red Menace Collective. You can also read draft chapters from the Be Gay, Do Crime book that I'm working on that will be out in May. And of course, you can read draft chapters of all my future books, or you can go back and see the past ones and stuff I'm still working on, or you can download PDF copies of my final book if you are in the Red Menace Collective. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com. This is separate from my main Substack, so my main Substack has a different set of supporter perks like the supporter Discord and Zoom calls and stuff like that. This Substack is only for the book. These are only for books, okay? So they're 2 different things. Will the book club be for... No, because the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club is about leftist documents, so it will not be for this book. The book club will be a separate kind of gathering to talk about it, but it will not be the same thing because that's not the purpose of what that is. So that's what I've been working on, guys, and I hope you do enjoy it. Now, before we jump into the movie, I do have a couple things that I want to talk about. We have to do a quick classical liberal update, okay? Because the classical liberals, per usual, are complaining. My favorite complaint of the day has been that James Lindsay is crying about the fact that someone that he doesn't like got invited to the White House. This is deeply offensive to James. Someone that he doesn't like got to go to the White House, and James has not gotten to go to the White House. And so specifically, he's pissed off that this guy, William Wolf, got invited to the White House. And you can see, and I think William Wolf is like a Christian nationalist or something. I don't really know that much about him. I don't know him. I don't like him. I don't dislike him. I don't really know anything about him. I just know that James doesn't like him. So he posted this picture today where he is one of many people in the Oval Office at the White House. It was a huge honor to represent Baptist leaders and meet Donald Trump today, along with Christian leaders in the Oval Office. So this guy posts a very nice picture of Trump being prayed on in the Oval Office, which I bet is an exciting experience for a lot of people. James responds by saying, Republicans are too undiscerning. There's little point to helping them understand anything. Now, listen, I gave up on the Republican Party a long time ago, so welcome to the party, James. Once again, you're about 2 years behind where I am because I gave up, maybe even 3 years. I gave up on the Republican Party a long-ass time ago. But I didn't give up on the Republican Party because someone I didn't like got invited to the White House. I actually had like legitimate complaints and legitimate grievances. I just think it's funny that James's response to seeing someone he doesn't like in a picture in the White House is to just give up on the right entirely. He's like, you people can't be helped. And then he starts retweeting people. So James is trying to get his audience all upset. And people are like, why is he invited to the White House? Why isn't James invited to the White House? James should be at the White House. Republican leaders can't see a wolf calling himself a Christian, even when it's literally his name. So he's real upset today. Real upset. Let's see. Don't care about that. Retweeting other people upset about this. Oh, Michael O'Fallon, the woke right has entered the Oval Office. Oh no, Baptist ministers are paying with Trump. We can't have that. We can't have that. They might not be classical liberals. Retweeting other people. Everyone warned you. This is a Christian nationalist movement. So James is crying on the internet per usual. And then Konstantin Kisin just posted the most pompous ass thing either earlier today or yesterday. And James Lindsay, of course, retweeted it. Okay, so I guess this was this morning. James retweeted this. Here is what Konstantin Kisin had to say. The classical liberal. The Jewish classical liberal. I said Konstantin Kisin was an atheist the other day. Konstantin Kisin's Jewish. I've totally spaced. It's Jewish. Not that that means anything. Jews are welcome here. No anti-Semitism allowed. I'm just merely commenting on the fact that Konstantin Kisin is Jewish. He said, some people think that my fierce opposition to the woke left has been unnecessary and excessive. I don't know about that, Konstantin. I actually think it hasn't been strong enough. Their positions of the left and their cowardly enablers have committed several unforgivable crimes. Chief among them is the destruction of language. Oh, you don't say, Konstantin. The destruction of language? We had no idea. Words like racist, Nazi, and misogynist were incredibly useful for describing people who hated people of other races, worshipped Hitler, and abused women. Such people are, mercifully, a tiny fraction of our society. But they are real and they do exist. And now, after a decade of the left using these words to describe normal people, a racist is someone who doesn't treat ethnic minorities as a special sacred group. A Nazi is someone who doesn't think men with dicks should be allowed to fight a woman in a cage. And a misogynist, someone who refuses to accept that men are the root of all evil. The result? Actual racists. Actual Nazis, actual misogynists are now impossible to describe accurately. The tools we had for keeping them outside of the mainstream society have been eroded, and the people who did this deserve all the scorn we can give them and more. Well, do you know who did that, Konstantin? You did. You did. You did that. The left didn't do that, Konstantin. You did that. But of course, Konstantin has no self-awareness at all because he is a classical liberal and they are just perpetually devoid of any self-awareness or, I don't know, like rational contemplation or, doing anything other than what feeds their confirmation bias on any given day. I mean, what a sad state of affairs. This is like the Konstantin Kisin is like, there's real Nazis, there's real Nazis, there's real Nazis, and we can't even call them Nazis because the left called them Nazis first. Okay, Constantine. Maybe settle down. Maybe try to, hinge yourself back into reality. Are the Nazis in the room with you right now, Constantine? Are the racists in the room with you right now? Or are you just making shit up to demonize people that you don't like? But my favorite moment of yesterday, came after we watched Carrie yesterday. And Carrie on her show yesterday explicitly denounced Elijah Schaffer multiple times. Elijah had Carrie on her show. Carrie, for people who don't know, Carrie is a brand new baby Christian classical liberal who used to be a social justice warrior, and Carrie is desperate for everyone to know this. And so she denounced Elijah Schaffer as an anti-Semite and a racist. And of course, we clipped that and put that on Twitter and tagged him in it. And Elijah gave me what is possibly my favorite moment of yesterday when he responded. And he said, "I've never been denounced by a leprechaun before." Touche, Elijah. First time for everything. And then Elijah retweeted it and said, "Oh no! A grown woman dressed as a leprechaun doesn't like me. Better hide my pot of gold before she gets really angry over some more mean tweets." Watching Elijah Schaffer just descend into having zero fucks to give. And you know what's really impressive about Elijah? Honestly, he's worked his ass off. He's built something completely independently on his own. He is being phenomenally successful at what he does. I know that Elijah is not everyone's cup of tea, and certainly, I sometimes get annoyed with him because, he does things that annoy me, and that's okay because we're different people and all that stuff. We're allowed. But, I have to say, I have a massive amount of respect for Elijah and what he's built. I didn't expect him to be as successful at this as he is. And I don't mean that as any shade or any disrespect. It's just that Elijah has worked so hard and he's hustled so much, and he has gotten himself into a position where he doesn't have to report to anyone. And he can say whatever the fuck he wants. He has his own studio. He has his own company. He's employing people that can't get employed elsewhere because they have inconvenient opinions. He's doing really well. His wife is barefoot and pregnant and making him bread and homemade stuff all the time. And he's perfectly happy with that. And good for him. Good for them. So Elijah W. All right, guys, we're going to get into our Judith Butler show now. And if you've never watched Judith Butler before with us, please feel free to ask questions. We always welcome questions on the channel when we're watching content that people might not be familiar with. All right, we are watching this interview with Judith Butler that she just did with Owen Jones, who is a socialist, and they're going to talk about lots of things, and apparently think that far-right fascists need to be completely afraid of her, and we're going to find out why. All right, let's get started.
One of the great public intellectuals.
Hang on, you got to hear the first line, though. You got to hear the first line. The first line is the best, the Spectre line. Just rewind. This isn't hard. There we go. You guys got to hear the Spectre line.
A spectre is haunting Europe and the United States, the spectre of Judith Butler. Judith Butler is one of the great public intellectuals of our age. You'll see where I'm going with that. One of the great public intellectuals of our age who has inspired particularly, I guess, younger generations. I don't know if we can still throw millennials in there. Millennials go up to about 43 now. I'm a geriatric millennial. The reason I talk about the spectre of Judith Butler is we're talking, we obviously talk a lot on this channel about the rise of the far right, of fascism. And Judith Butler has become one of the great bêtes noires of the far right movements in Europe and the United States, which I would say is something to be pretty proud of. Judith, last time I interviewed you was 4 years ago. And a fair bit has happened since then. I want to say a fair bit. I think the general descent into hell has been pretty steep. And has hell, particularly, in the last 2 years, become acute, I would say. we're going to talk later on. We'll talk about Palestine and we'll talk about Trumpism in general. You've written "Who's Afraid of Gender?" Really brilliant book. It's now on paperback. Everyone do go and get yourself a copy. We'll talk about that. But the reason, you've been at the forefront of talking about questions of gender for so long. And I think when we talk about, say, Trumpism 2.0 and Trumpism 1.0, if that's possible, what's definitely shifted is transphobia. The anti-trans backlash has become particularly fervent. I was in the US for the elections. I went from state to state in the Rust Belt, and you would hear these, from a British perspective, quite jarring political ads, because we don't have them here, yes, where they would just often go in hard on transphobia. I'd be in Pennsylvania, I'd be in North Carolina, I'd be in Michigan, Wisconsin. What do you think's happened there? Why has this become? It was already there. Don't get me wrong, it was there. What has happened? Why do you think this has become? It's on steroids now.
Yes. Well, I think there are maybe 2 points. One is it's been a very live issue at the World Congress of the Families and various international church conferences for a very long time. In fact, the anti-trans but also anti-gender movement, and they're overlapping but not always the same.
Wait.
Started off in the...
What was that, Judith? What was that? The anti-trans movement and the anti-gender movement are overlapping, but they're not always the same? Well, that's a nice little admission, isn't it? For people who don't understand that the trans movement is not the same as the queer movement. Anytime Judith Butler is talking about gender, she is not talking about trans as in transitioning your kids from man to woman or woman to man or boy to girl, boy, whatever you want. She's not talking about that. She's talking about queer, which has the goal of abolishing gender entirely. And so what she just said is the anti-trans movement, people who are against transing kids, and the anti-gender movement, the people who are complaining about gender ideology, are overlapping, but they're not the same thing. Listen to that again. This is how we know what their true meaning is, guys, because we listen carefully when they say stuff like this.
Anti-trans, but also
Hang on, we'll go back a little bit more.
The anti-trans, but also anti-gender movement, and they're overlapping, but not always the same.
They're overlapping, but not always the same. That's not coming from me. That's coming from the godparent of queer theory.
Started off in the 90s with the Vatican making various pronouncements against gender theory, gender ideology. And it moved through Latin America. So, if I am a problem for the right, I was a problem for the Christian right in Latin America way before I became a problem in Europe or indeed in the US. And when I say I'm a problem, it's not really me, it's whatever I stand for with numerous other people, namely the study of gender or the theory of, or various theories of gender or gender studies or whatever is meant by gender. I wanted just to say that in 2017 and 18, Trump made efforts to have his Health and Human Services Department say that one's gender has to be the sex that one is assigned at birth. And he failed at that point because there was too much conflicting legislation. There were judicial decisions that allowed for gender, especially in relationship to sex discrimination. And that, his own department said, we can't make this happen. And in fact, the Supreme Court, in a relatively unadvertised decision, Clayton v. Bostock, decided that, well, sex, when we talk about sex and sex discrimination, we might mean the sex assigned at birth, but we might also mean a sex assumed in time by an individual. And whether one is discriminated against on the basis of the first or the second sense of sex, it's still discrimination, and it's sex discrimination. And that allowed, at least potentially, for trans people who are discriminated against in employment or elsewhere in life, to make claims under the current sex discrimination law in the US that they have suffered sex discrimination. So interestingly enough, the legal category of sex expanded to accept gender, meaning whatever the lived experience of sex might be, as a legitimate part of sex. And so Trump now has a problem because his Supreme Court, and indeed Neil Gorsuch, who is one of his appointees, authored this decision, which is much more open-minded and accepting of new sex assignments than Trump himself. So even in the anti-gender ideology extremism executive order that was issued on January 2nd, there is a little proviso, like the government must guard against misapplications of that particular Supreme Court decision. So he's seeking to undermine his own Supreme Court appointees. Maybe we can see the beginning of a certain kind of fission.
Wow.
I think many people from their church communities, especially right-wing Christian ones, I guess predominantly evangelical in the US, but also some right-wing Catholic congregations, have been learning for some time that gender is an ideology, a false way of seeing things that's dangerous for children. Their children are either being indoctrinated, or they're being seduced, or they're being converted. So you
social contagion.
Yes, or you send your kid to school and they come back trans, or you spend a huge amount of money in the US to send your kid to college and then they come back trans. And this is what education is doing. So it's anti-education, it's anti-gender, but it also has a massive fantasy that people who teach gender or think about gender are imposing a doctrine, that they're doctrinaire, they're indoctrinating, or that they're seducing or converting or seeking to interfere with children in ways that are radically unacceptable. And both of those are clearly lies, but they are lies that are extremely believable by people who have anxieties about, well, what is this gender thing? And are they taking my sex away? And what are they doing to my...
Judith Butler just said the entire quiet part out loud. And then is like, and they're wrong to believe all this stuff. But, you know, I understand why they think it's happening, but they're wrong to believe it. I'm sorry. Can we just go back and watch that entire, admission again? Because that was crazy.
Neil Gorsuch, who is one of his appointees, authored this decision, which is much more open-minded and accepting of new sex assignments than Trump himself. So even in the anti-gender ideology extremism executive order that was issued on January 2nd, there is a little proviso, like the government must guard against misapplications of that particular Supreme Court decision. So he's seeking to undermine his own Supreme Court appointees. Maybe we can see the beginning of a certain kind of fission. I think many people from their church communities, especially right-wing Christian ones, I guess predominantly evangelical in the US, but also some right-wing Catholic congregations, have been learning for some time that gender is an ideology, a false way of seeing things that's dangerous for children. Their children are either being indoctrinated, or they're being seduced, or they're being converted. So you send
social contagion.
Yes, or you send your kid to school and they come back trans, or you spend a huge amount of money in the US to send your kid to college and then they come back trans. And this is what education is doing. So it's anti-education, it's anti-gender, but it also has a massive fantasy that people who teach gender or think about gender are imposing a doctrine, that they're doctrinaire, they're indoctrinating, or that they're seducing or converting or seeking to interfere with children in ways that are radically unacceptable. And both of those are clearly lies, but they are lies that are extremely believable by people who have anxieties about, well, what is this gender thing? And are they?
Yeah, guys, it's just because we have anxieties around gender that we might believe that the public schools and the K through 12 universities are teaching kids queer theory. It's just because we're fearful and have anxieties about our own gender that we think you guys are teaching this in the school. Yeah, Judith, that's the only reason. That's the only reason, Judith. Yeah, it's no different than a mostly peaceful protest. This is leftist gaslighting at its fine. I told you, Judith Butler is on a PR tour where she's like going around and doing all these talks saying, we're not really that scary. We're not trying to undermine gender. Why are you so afraid of gender studies, New College of Florida? Why don't you just reinstate your gender studies program, anti-woke New College of Florida? Why don't you just do that? Because we're not scary. I don't know where you're getting all these crazy ideas. This is like the third talk that we've seen her give on this in like a couple of weeks.
Taking my sex away, and what are they doing to my children? So all their fears, some of them quite intimate, and some of them quite political about the future of the world, get condensed into this thing called gender, or sometimes migrant, right? Which is another, conflated idea.
That point about children. I mean, in the 1970s, this was the key attack line when it came to the backlash against the gay rights movement. People obviously feel very visceral about their children. You can see why this becomes the point of attack. But Anita Bryant, who recently died, who was, I guess, very much one of the leaders of the anti-gay rights movement of that era, at the time, one of the most popular women in the United States. And the name of her campaign was Save Our Children. And she said, when in response to gay rights, she said, what about children's rights? We're a children's rights movement. And so it's interesting because history doesn't always repeat itself, but as the cliche goes, it does often rhyme.
Yes, it does. And of course, the paradox is that the Trump administration is now, and the British government are denying children the right to gender-affirming care. So who's harming the children? And which church has been molesting children for decades and
Judith.
being exonerated for having done so? I mean, who's hurting the children? If we really want to try to figure out who's denying them the capacity to read books, taking books out of libraries. No, you may not learn about gay and lesbian lives. You may not understand what trans is. You may not even read to come up with a viewpoint of your own, anything on gender, because gender is being defunded, or gender books being taken out of libraries that are publicly funded. Whose healthcare is being denied? Whose education is being denied? Who's being denied a loving and supportive environment to figure out who they want to be in life? And that's the right wing.
Yeah,
what they say to us, to both you and I suppose, on this is. We are trying to save children for the likes of you. This is, when I was in the United States, a commentator said this to me quite passionately.
We are trying to save children from the likes of you.
You supported what is an experiment on children. This is mutilating children, obviously buying into various myths about gender-affirming care. I mean, in Britain, you're on, in practice, waiting lists for many, many years. You don't have the sorts of medical procedures they're talking about before the age of 18 anyway. And normally you're years and years and years and years on a waiting list until you get any form of gender-affirming care. But nonetheless, that's what they say. How do you respond to that? Which is, you have backed this terrible experiment on children, and we're protecting children from these extreme ideological, threats to our kids.
Well, first of all, I don't know, mutilation is a very strong word. But if I were to use it, and let's see if I can, I would say that denying healthcare and a capacious education to children is a form of harming them or possibly even mutilating them.
Oh my God!
So, or in
Judith Butler said that if you don't teach queer theory in schools, you are literally mutilating children. Again, Judith? Again? Let's just go back a little bit. So we need to get Owen's part in here too.
that's the right wing.
What they say to us, to both you and I suppose, on this is, we are trying to save children for the likes of you. This is, I mean, when I, in fact, was in the United States, a commentator said this to me, quite passionately, to say the least. That you supported what is an experiment on children. This is mutilating children, obviously buying into various myths about gender affirming care. I mean, in Britain, you're on, in practice, waiting lists for many years. You don't have the sorts of medical procedures they're talking about before the age of 18 anyway, and normally you're years and years on a waiting list until you get any form of gender affirming care. But nonetheless, that's what they say. How do you respond to that? Which is, you have backed this terrible experiment on children, and we're protecting children from these extreme ideological threats to our kids.
Well, first of all, I don't know, mutilation is a very strong word, but if I were to use it, and let's see if I can, I would say that denying healthcare and a capacious education to children is a form of harming them or possibly even mutilating them.
Wow.
Or insisting that they remain in the gender assigned at birth, or insisting that they grow up heterosexual, or insisting that their sexuality take the form of heterosexual marriage and then and only then reproduce.
And by the way, everything that Judith Butler just said, for people who don't know, those are the cardinal tenets of queer theory. What she's describing is cis heteronormativity. And basically the goal of queer theory is to push back on all these norms. Now, when she says heterosexual, though, this is tricky. We have them on video saying when they say something is straight or heterosexual, they don't actually mean it in terms of like you're being attracted to the opposite gender. They mean it in terms of upholding societal norms. And this rings true because they have a term called homonormativity, which is about gay people essentially doing what straight people do. It's used as a slur. They don't like it. And so the goal of queer theory is not to have everyone be a straight white man. The goal of queer theory is to undermine the norms that uphold gender and uphold the nuclear family. That is what Judith is talking about there. If people have questions about that, please let me know and I will explain it a little bit more.
All of these constraining and repressive norms are mutilating to children, to young people who are trying to find their way and whose lives depend on departing from those norms, right? Who are gay or lesbian or non-binary or bisexual or who are intersex and don't fit into the binary categories, never did, or maybe do on their own accord and in their own way. But to deny healthcare, to pathologize sexuality, to threaten to de-ratify gay and lesbian marriages or parenting rights, as Maloney is trying to do. I mean, all of this is a mutilation of other people, whether they're children, young adults, or adults themselves. This is a mutilating exercise of state power on the bodies.
This is a mutilating exercise of state power? Are you fucking insane? I'm gonna have to go through and make a better clip of this later. But like, a mutilating experience of state power. Wow. You know, this would be like the ultimate. And Judith Butler likes Sophie. Judith Butler endorsed Sophie's latest book. And so if we could have a conversation between Judith Butler and Sophie Lewis, I think that would be amazing. Dragon Balls, thank you for being a member of the channel for 13 months. If gender is lived experience and trans is transcend, then anti-gender and anti-trans overlap. But if anti-gender and trans equals binary, then Judith is anti-trans. The language plays confound, Dragon Balls. The language plays confound.
Of people who should be free to experiment as they need, right? It's the freedom to experiment that we're actually trying to safeguard. We're not experimenting on them. I mean, I don't know anybody in a gender studies class who says, okay.
So Mizakan is like the best at explaining why straight doesn't actually mean straight. Sexuality means sex acts. Hetero and homosexuality means gendered sexuality categories and socially constructed behaviors. So does everyone understand the difference? This is why when Judith Butler talks about heteronormativity or heteropatriarchy, people think she's talking about gay marriage versus straight marriage. She's not. I know this sounds weird for people who are new, but you gotta roll with the queer Marxists. The queer Marxists have a different language. What she is talking about are gendered sexuality categories that are socially constructed by capitalism. So they don't like it when gay people get married and are in a monogamous relationship and just have a job and have a house and all that stuff. They don't like that. They call that homonormativity. In the same way that they don't like it when straight people are in monogamous two-person relationships and buy a house and particularly participate in the economy and all that stuff. That's heteronormativity. It has nothing. The homo versus hetero is not about like the genders of the people that you're fucking. Essentially, it's these socially constructed categories that are created to uphold capitalism. I suck at explaining this. Mizakan's much better at explaining it. I'm sure there are people in the chat who are better at explaining it. So if people are new, if you're confused about what was just said, please do ask us questions and we will try to answer your questions.
Everybody in here, you have to be gay. Everybody in here, you have to be trans. Or everybody in here, you have to read this book and agree with every proposition. That's not what happens. People rise up and argue, and there's huge conflicts, and they storm out, and they come back, and
hey, Captain, I know you seem really excited about the JFK stuff. I will say, I don't anticipate going into the JFK stuff all that much, and it's not really something that belongs in the Red Menace Collective Discord because it's not really about the far left. But I appreciate that you're interested in it, and I hope that, if you find something interesting or if you find some interesting coverage, let us know. It's not something I do plan to go into on the show, though, because it's just not in my wheelhouse at all. There are many better people that can do that than I am.
This paradigm, that paradigm, this is like a raucous exercise of open inquiry. This is not indoctrination.
Okay, yeah.
During the
Judith.
presidential election of the United States, a prominent individual had a pop at both of us, let's put it that way. I was then having to talk about them. I normally just ignore because I was then, in Britain in particular, discussion about an entire minority becomes a psychodrama about a children's book author. But basically, during the election, on the election night itself, I was in New York. I wrote one tweet in which I said the US economic model's bust, wages for most working people have stagnated for decades. You either have an answer to that or someone else will, but the best Kamala Harris could muster was I'm not Trump. That didn't work. And then I said, I'm going back to my hotel in New York with a Muslim Pakistani American cab driver who voted for Donald Trump because, in quotes, the prices were too high under Biden. That was then misrepresented because that tweet was taken in isolation as though I was sneering at the cab driver, which obviously wasn't. But J.K. Rowling, in response, which is the children's author I'm referring to, quote tweeted, had a picture of an image about how the Guardian will stand up to 4 more years of Donald Trump, which she took off the Guardian website. And she said, ooh, let me guess, emotive long-form pieces from Owen Jones complaining that American taxi drivers aren't reading enough Judith Butler.
Yeah,
you saw that. I saw you asked about it. There was an advert in America which was Donald Trump is for you, Kamala Harris is for they, them. And it's that's what this is tapping into.
That's actually
What's your response to
that? Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'm worried that at least some part of the Democratic Party, the centrist part, that's unwilling to really understand their failure as a failure of a connection to the working class. Okay, that part of the Democratic Party.
Is this my birthday? Is this Christmas? Is this Valentine's Day all rolled into one? Is Judith Butler just going completely like no training wheels in this interview? The Democratic Party is failing because they're not connected to the working class, Judith?
I'm worried that at least some part of the Democratic Party, the centrist part, that's unwilling to really understand their failure as a failure of a connection to the working class. Okay, that part of the Democratic Party says various things that indicate that, gosh, we should have been harder on trans people. We should have expressed more pathologizing hatred for them, or we should have had stronger military presence at the border, or shut out more people, or started to deport more than we did. So I'm changing the topic just a little to say that one response to comments like J.K. Rowling's is to say, oh my God, what were we thinking to support trans kids, or to think that trans people have a right to live and breathe without fear of violence or discrimination, and that they're entitled to legal recognition and proper health care. Oh my God, why would we think such a thing? They should be deprived of all those basic rights, and their autonomy should be undermined, and we should in fact be denying their very existence. Then we'll win. And it's like, but who would we be if we were to win on that basis? We would have lost all principle and all commitment to equality, justice, autonomy, basic values that any decent political party should be adhering to. So, I mean, Rowling, in my mind, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not, but she imagines that trans issues or gender issues are elite issues that come out of left-leaning journalism or urban elite left-leaning educational institutions. So, and even though she doesn't dissociate herself from certain aspects of the left, she thinks that there's a kind of elitism and, what would I say, fraudulence or insensitivity on the part of those of us who would point out trans people are also part of the working class. And in fact, they are increasingly part of the working class as they lose jobs or get disavowed by their own families and don't have access to whatever intergenerational wealth there may be. Trans people denied health care are also on the street among those, at least in the US, who have no chance of health care or who are dependent on services that are woefully inadequate. In other words, all of these anti-trans bills are having massive economic and social effects on trans people, on gender non-conforming people and non-binary people, on intersex people, like stripping them of their rights. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about rights stripping, which is happening in relation to trans people, especially trans youth, migrants, international students who arrive at a public protest for principled reasons, right? Those researchers who are trying to reverse climate catastrophe.
Hang on. This is a good question for a new person. So this is in regards to Judith Butler saying that trans people are part of the working class. They become working class by losing their jobs and being homeless. Does she not know what working class is? That's not what she's saying. It's not the argument that's being made. Trans people are part of the working class because they are fundamentally separated from the bourgeois class, the property-owning class, the managerial class. The argument that the left has is that trans people can't get ahead because of capitalism. It's not because they don't have jobs or that they're homeless and they make them part of the working class. It's because of the culture and the system that makes it impossible for them to advance within the oppressive structure. So let me know if that makes sense to you or if you have follow-up questions. And if someone else has a better way to explain it, please feel free to give it a try.
Figure out ways of regenerating this earth. I mean, to strip these folks of their rights or their capacities to do their job is not only to undermine democracy, but it's to augment state power. So the real question is, why would J.K. Rowling put herself on the side of those who are increasingly authoritarian, who are against freedom, who are against autonomy, who are against equality, and who believe that rights stripping is the way to restore a proper social order? Now, her proper social order is, two sexes, only two sexes, everything else is fraudulent. Everything else is made up or nefarious. Well, why not accept the complexity of human life? Why would J.K. Rowling rather augment state power, clinging to the idea of binary sex, even when it means that she is actively supporting authoritarians? Putin loves her. Trump is effectively citing her and her group of trans exclusionary feminists in the anti-gender ideology extremism executive order, right? He's saying that gender ideology is something that threatens women and that the state now intervenes to protect women.
Judith Butler is making the argument that J.K. Rowling saying that there are men and there are women and it's biological and there's only men and women and there's only two, and she believes in binary sex and that men can't be women and women can be men. Judith Butler says that J.K. Rowling is upholding an authoritarian regime and supporting a totalitarian state. That's crazy. Yeah, we're definitely going to do that. That's absolutely going to happen. Makes sense, but she said it in a way that made it sound like she didn't think that trans people were working class. No, she thinks that all trans people are working class. This is a reflection of your lack of understanding of the language she's using. It's not a reflection of what she said. My recommendation is, if you want to learn how to speak their language, you just have to watch more of their content. We will come and teach you their language if you have questions, but I need to make this really clear. This is your lack, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad, by the way, but to be real, this is your lack of the understanding of the language of what she's talking about. It's not based on what she just said. All trans people are proletariat. There is not a single trans person that she is going to say is like rightfully part of the bourgeois, because that's not an opportunity that's available for them that is in Judith Butler's mind. The reason they would lose out on generational wealth is because their parents would kick them out of the house for being trans. Thus, that's how generational wealth is perpetuated. This is one of the reasons why the left wants to overthrow the nuclear family. They want to abolish the family because of the generational wealth issues, where some people have access to generational wealth and some people do not have access to generational wealth. So I do understand why you see it that way, but you don't fully understand the language yet, is what I'm trying to articulate. Let's listen to this again. Judith Butler going off on J.K. Rowling.
So the real question is, why would J.K. Rowling put herself on the side of those who are increasingly authoritarian, who are against freedom, who are against autonomy, who are against equality, and who believe that rights stripping is the way to restore a proper social order? Now, her proper social order is, two sexes, only two sexes, everything else is fraudulent. Everything else is made up or nefarious. Well, why not accept the complexity of human life? Why would J.K. Rowling rather augment state power, clinging to the idea of binary sex, even when it means that she is actively supporting authoritarians? Putin loves her. Trump is effectively citing her and her group of trans exclusionary feminists in the anti-gender ideology extremism executive order, right? He's saying that gender ideology is something that threatens women and that the state now intervenes to protect women against gender ideology. She wants that protection. She wants to augment state powers telling us what our sex must be, what our sexuality must be, what our intimate associations must look like in order to get legal recognition. It's anti-feminist. It's anti-LGBTQI plus. It is, and it is in favor of, even if she doesn't say explicitly, I'm pro-authoritarian, there's a reason why Putin cites her. There's a reason why Trump has effectively cited her or her group in this hideous executive order. So what I don't understand is how they sleep. I mean, how do these folks sleep? I don't understand.
Very easily.
I mean,
probably,
just in terms of so people know the reference, J.K. Rowling was referenced in the speech by Vladimir Putin when he cited it in a speech criticizing cancel culture, like some sort of Fox News pundit. I mean, just quickly on that, J.K. I mean, the idea of somebody now J.K. Rowling's official spokesperson, not something obviously people are accustomed to. But I mean, what she says in response to people like us there is, well, actually, that's not fair. That's outrageous. How dare both of you? Because the real issue is the left gave up this territory. I've supported Labour all my life. That kind of, that's what she'd say. But the left went off into this extreme territory, and what do you expect? The right then have come in and taken it as an issue, and that's our fault.
Yes.
Well, it's not extreme territory, but right-wing extremists have been enormously inflammatory about it. Right. So they've stoked fears that now makes people feel that, oh, gender, trans, all these issues, they're going to destroy my family. They're going to destroy my sex. They're going to destroy the earth, society as we know it. I mean, massively hyperbolic fears. So who has taken a legitimate civil rights issue and made it so inflammatory? And we've seen this in the history of civil rights in the US. Like, if Black people were to have civil rights, said many right-wing racists in the United States in the 50s and the 60s and deep into the 70s, if they were to have equality, that would be the end of society as we know it. That would be chaos. That would be the end of law. That would be the end of the family, of community, of church. It's like, no, none of those things happened. None of those things happened.
Just talking about
the end of a white supremacist idea of family, church, and society. Yes, I'm sorry. They had to grieve that loss.
Judith Butler said you might have to grieve the white supremacist loss of the idea of family, church, and society. Again, Judith?
Law, that would be the end of the family, of community, of church. It's like, no, none of those things happened. None of those things happened.
Just talking about
the end of a white supremacist idea of family, church, and society. Yes, I'm sorry. They had to grieve that loss. That's right.
The white supremacist idea of the family, the church, and society, they have to grieve the loss of that idea. Again?
The end of the family, of community, of church. It's like, no, none of those things happened. None of those things happened.
Just talking about
the end of a white supremacist idea of family, church, and society. Yes, I'm sorry. They had to grieve that loss. That's right.
Wow.
But, I mean, just how
and just so we're clear, the reason that Judith Butler believes that the family, the church, and what was the other thing she said? The family, the church, the whites, and hang on, one sec. One more time.
The end of the law. That would be the end of the family, of community, of church. It's like, no, none of those things happened. None of those things happened.
Just talking about
the end of a white supremacist idea of family, church, and society. Yes, I'm sorry.
The white supremacist idea of the family, the church, and society or community. The reason that Judith Butler said the white supremacist idea of the family, the church, and the society or the community is because, again, people need to understand this. Judith Butler is not talking about skin color. She is talking about the system. She's talking about the system that creates systemic equality. The nuclear family is considered to be part of the capitalist normative system that upholds the normal society that will disappear under socialism, which is what Judith Butler wants. That's why it's considered to be a white supremacist idea. It upholds bourgeois culture, bourgeois society. That's what whiteness means when we say whiteness means capitalism. Christianity exists in the capitalist world. The left believes, because people need a coping mechanism with which to deal with capitalism. They believe that Christianity and all religion will just naturally fade away under communism or socialism. And society, community, of course, is a reference to just like the system at large, the current culture that we live in. Yeah, another way to say this might be chosen family, the state, and socialism. Yep. Yep. Wow, Judith. Wow.
You know, they had to grieve that loss. That's right. But
I'm interested in how were your thoughts on how rights rise and fall together, and actually how this cuts across the claim that, for example, trans rights and women's rights are on a collision course, which has become so much part of the discourse in this country. And if you look at, for example, Ireland or Spain, they've had, in the last few years, you've had, in Ireland, for example, equal marriage, the right to abortion, limited compared to other countries, but still the right to abortion, as well as trans rights legislation passed. In Spain, equally, you've had legislation taking on male violence against girls and women, as well as support for the rights of lesbian mothers, and you've had trans rights legislation. Whereas if you look at Italy, for example, you've had a government which is anti-trans and also taking lesbian mothers off birth certificates. And of course, in the United States, you have seen across the board, you have the assault on trans rights. And the stronger that is in any given state, normally the stronger the backlash is against women's reproductive rights, the right to choose. And this reflected, you think, with Trump's executive orders as well. What do you think about that? Actually, this is a very clear, you can see there that rights rise and fall, that women's rights in an inclusive sense, trans rights and LGBTQ rights, they actually rise and fall together. And that's the tendency we can see today.
Yes, but you see, I think, look, I mean, you're right to say that in the UK, there's a movement to pit women's rights understood as within a radical feminist frame, a contemporary radical feminist frame, not the traditional radical feminist claim of Andrea Dworkin or someone like her who would have nothing to do with contemporary radical feminism. But okay, there is an effort to pit so-called women's rights, meaning assigned female at birth, women, against trans rights in order to discount or refuse the claim that trans women are women. And that's their way of drawing that line. But in fact, if we take the more capacious idea of sex discrimination that I was just describing, like women are discriminated against because they're assumed to be a certain way. They can't do that job, or they should be doing another job, or I don't take them seriously because they are women, right? Trans people are discriminated against because there are caricatures and prejudicial understandings of who they are and what they're about, including the idea that they're all actually rapists or men who have nefarious designs on women, which I find to be enormously offensive and not at all supported by evidence. I mean, we could find the example, but if we make the example into the paradigm for understanding trans life, then that's incredibly transphobic.
That's what happened to gay people. It's what happened to gay people as well. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like, well, here's a gay person who did something wrong. Well, all gay people do that. Here's a Jewish person, nefarious financial transaction. Oh, all Jewish people. We don't do that, right? Like, we don't do that unless we are openly interested in discrimination. But look, these are common concerns like anti-violence, anti-discrimination, freedom to live our lives as we must, autonomy as a feminist value in relationship to reproductive rights, as a trans value in relationship to sex assignment. Why wouldn't those be enormous bonds of solidarity? But also working conditions, who's denied employment, who's treated badly in the workplace, who doesn't get the job because of a prejudicial understanding of who they are on the basis of their sex. And, sex discrimination is discrimination on the basis of a perception of sex, like, oh, this person, because they are that sex, cannot do X and Y, or this person, on the basis of their sex, cannot possibly be a member of our community, cannot fit in to our academic department. It's a prejudicial understanding of sex. So what's actually being corrected is the prejudice. And the prejudice happens against trans people, it happens against non-binary, it happens against all women in an inclusive way, and so-called effeminate men who don't comport with certain ideas of masculinity, right? We can have a capacious idea of gender that brings all of those things together and shows us that these are issues of employment and hence class, right? And hence inequality, social inequality. These are not elite issues. These are life and death issues for people who are trying to live and work and love freely in this world. Why wouldn't we all come together in wishing for that world?
Well, it's certainly not the world we have at the moment. And on that,
let me just say this: it's worse in the UK than anywhere else.
Yeah, I know
that pitting of feminism against trans. That most feminists in the US do not feel this way, and throughout Latin America, the major feminist movements in Chile and Argentina are all trans inclusive. In South Africa, they are trans inclusive. They understand these to be massively important coalitions. They are anti-violence. They're anti-extractivist. They work within anti-colonial frameworks. They're not having these identitarian struggles of this kind. They are trying to build large forms of solidarity to fight enormous forms of power.
And I should say, of course, there are lots of trans-inclusive feminist thinkers in Britain. Yeah, obviously,
there is live in this neighborhood for some reason.
Yeah. You're currently in Stoke Newington. There's certainly a lot of. It's not a transphobic hotbed, Stoke Newington, I don't think. Let's just in terms of the world we're currently in, as is the United States, where you're visiting from. Has fascism come to the United States? Do you think is that hyperbolic?
It is not hyperbolic. I guess I make a distinction.
Wait, has fascism come to the United States? Is it hyperbolic to say that you live in a fascist dictatorship, Judith?
We're currently in, as is the United States, where you're visiting from. Has fascism come to the United States? Do you think is that hyperbolic?
It is not hyperbolic. I guess I make a distinction between a fascist state, a set of fascist trends that are operating within a particular society, and fascist passions, which can be stoked and amplified by usually autocratic or overtly authoritarian powers. So I think what we're actually seeing right now is an increasingly authoritarian state, which is challenging principles of democracy, including the separation of powers and constitutional democracy as such. But it is supported by stoking fascist passions, which are passions for elimination, like vulnerable groups that are identifiable by autocratic regimes, like migrants, like international students, like trans people, like non-gender conforming people. These folks and all those who are involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is just another way of saying racialized, right? Racialized people. So to deny them rights, to eliminate their rights, and in some cases to deny their very existence, or to deport them, detain them, incarcerate them in an effort to undermine their capacity to exercise rights or to strip them of rights altogether. So these are, to a certain degree, eliminationist strategies where you're trying forcibly to deport a group of people at the border, to the border.
Yes, Judith.
You're trying to
it is.
purify the society of dissident elements. Wow. I mean, all of these are eliminationist. And I would say that the fascist dimension is surely bound up with the desire to eliminate certain populations from the broader community and to target them, to strip them of rights, to deport them. Now, this is not very far, I'm afraid to say, from a foreign policy that basically says the Gazans should be subject to forcible displacement, clear the land. They don't belong to that land. They have no rights to that land. So forcible displacement or continuing bombardment, which actually takes their lives and destroys the infrastructures of a life. I mean, I think we need to think about this. How often is forcible displacement now being invoked as the way to so-called solve a perceived social problem like migration or rights stripping, which I take to be an excited form of fascist practice, but which involves or implies the augmentation, the strengthening of a state apparatus that is more and more skeptical of democratic principles and willing to override constitutional democracy as we know it.
Wow.
Before I ask you, I want to talk about Palestine. What I'm interested in, and I don't think I've had a satisfactory answer to this, is with Trumpism, why now? And by that, the reason I'm asking is exactly 90 years ago, a very famous book, Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, which obviously at the time you had fascism on the march in Germany and Italy in particular, but also elsewhere. It was just before the Spanish Civil War. And obviously what that looked at is the potential, actually, what if it did happen in the United States? It looks at the rise of a dictator, and actually there were quite disturbing echoes with Donald Trump, actually. The reason I ask why now is, if you look at fascism in the 1930s, capitalism was in an extremely acute crisis at that particular time. And there was also an insurgent left. You'd had the Russian Revolution, the threat of so-called Bolshevism, terrified elites across they're going to come for us. So fascism then became, something which became seen as a crude, vulgar last resort for many business elites, essentially.
You don't say.
And you had a lower middle class being forced to be proletarianized, I guess, driven into the work.
You don't say, Owen. Owen, did you just say that the Bolsheviks freaked a lot of people out with their policies, and that these people, who honestly probably just wanted to be left alone, became fascists because the Bolsheviks were pushing things too far in the other direction, and they saw that fascism was the only way to defeat the Bolsheviks? Is that what you just said, Owen?
Extremely acute crisis at that particular time. And there was also an insurgent left. You'd had the Russian Revolution, the threat of so-called Bolshevism, terrified elites across they're going to come for us. So fascism then became, something which became seen as a crude, vulgar last resort for many business elites, essentially. And you had a lower middle class being forced to be proletarianized, I guess, driven into the working class. In the 1970s, the US was in real crisis in lots of ways. Defeated in Vietnam, stagflation, racist backlash to the civil rights movement, riots across the United States, a genuine increase in violent crime, which is much bigger than it is today. I could go on, but you had George Wallace at the time, but he didn't get away. He got 13%. He got 13% in 68. Yeah. And he was the Alabama segregationist, for those who don't know.
Yes, I certainly remember.
But why now? Why? I mean, I'm not saying the economic model is in crisis. I get that. And this is obviously a big part of it. But why did it happen? Why does this happen now and not in the 1970s, for example?
Well, I think we have to remember that the neoliberal consensus in the Democratic Party, which includes Biden and Harris, has implied for many people a degradation or absence of basic social services. As basic social services are no longer provided by the state and they become increasingly privatized, people don't know if they can afford basic things. And let's also remember, we've seen the decimation of unions in the US, which means that the conditions of work have changed. People are on temporary contracts. If they're on contracts, they don't have proper representation. They risk health issues on the workplace or massive sense of insecurity about the future. The farmers don't know whether their farms are going to be able to produce. A lot of people can't make a living wage. They're working overtime. Some of the taxi drivers I talk to are working overtime. They need to send money back to their parents in another country, and they don't have enough, and they keep working, and I can't tell you what their hours are. It's absolutely horrible. But I think more and more people are either in debt or can't make ends meet or live in fear that there's no future. There's no future perhaps for their children or for them or for a way of life that they remember or that they wish for. So the strong state apparatus and the fascist zeal to eliminate populations or strip them of their rights, that comes along with a sense of, oh, then an order will be restored. Oh, then things will go back to being the way they are, and I'll have a more secure sense of family, of community, of church, of order in the world, and I'll be able to project a future in which I thrive and my children thrive. I mean, I think people are terrified about the future. Now, there are all kinds of reasons why they are. And I think we can look at the neoliberal permutation of capitalism, which is huge, and the Democrats have extended that. We can look at the ways in which people have been forcibly displaced, the terror that accompanies consciously or unconsciously climate catastrophe, especially for people in agrarian businesses or living in coastal or river regions. There's a lot that's unpredictable and totally frightening. Also, open-ended wars, waged and sustained for reasons that are either completely unjust or unclear. I think people have a lot of reasons to be afraid. And some of them have to do with their own capacity to reproduce the conditions of their own life. And some of them have to do with an intimate sense of who they are and their family and their place in the world. And you can stoke fears.
This is basically, I wonder, did he design this because it looked like a kefia? I don't even know how to say that word. It looks like the socialist thing they do when they're trying to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. There we go. I'm a socialist now.
Fears from that state of fear. Or, and you could say, it's gender, it's trans, it's migrants. That's what's really happening. And then all the systemic issues, the militarism, the borders, the climate issue, the capitalism and its neoliberal variant, all of these things are exonerated, right? Attention is deflected from them all. So the left really actually needs to say, this is the reason why you're feeling frightened and insecure. And this is the world that we want to realize together. Right. But if we don't do that, we're failing in some fundamental way.
It's interesting you mentioned war, because when I went to the Trump rallies in various states, they came across a lot of those attending as kind of anti-migrant peaceniks, because they talked about the wars generally a lot. Yeah. So that came up. It was generally inflation, migrants, wars. But the other point is that what you just said, I think that's my thesis about the Donald Trump cares about you, Kamala Harris cares about they them, which isn't actually about people who are obsessed with trans people, because most people just aren't actually, it's not on people's radar generally at all. Yeah. It's more a sense of, if the Democrats don't have a transformative agenda for working class people, which meets their needs and directs anger at elites, and at the same time they have a kind of liberal identity politics check box approach where it's all rhetorical, it's easy for the right to say, they have nothing to say for you, but they only care about these minorities. And that's what the right have always tried to do. And obviously, Steve Bannon talks about flood the zone with shit. If the Democrats don't have a coherent answer to the problems of Americans of working class Americans of all types, then it's easy to go, they only care about these minorities. And we want people to care about minorities. But do you see what I mean? That's how they do it.
Maybe. I mean, I do fault the centrist Democratic Party for some of its failure, but I also think we have to take into account the media blitz, which you yourself documented quite well, by the right wing, and some of their robocalls. I was in Michigan the week of the election, and people were saying everybody they knew got a robocall.
Oh no, not a robocall!
Where a man said, Kamala Harris will authorize trans surgeries on illegal migrants. Right. And I just thought, oh, God, how perfect. They put together two fears that people have, and then they stoke them and amalgamate them so that it's all going to happen at the same time. But also involved in that is Kamala Harris. We have to ask whether people in the United States could really handle having a woman of color who is educated and liberal in the non-financial sense, but could they handle that, or was there a racist aversion to the elite Black president, which we also saw in a certain kind of rancorous reaction against the Obamas, which was full of kind of wild hatred, right? You know, you can have your critique of Obama. I have my critique of Obama. The wild hatred for the Obamas and the caricatures, you know, that's a form of racism in the U.S. that most of the pollsters didn't take into account, because who's going to admit to that? People don't admit to that, even though it's totally operative in the ways in which they identify or indeed hate. So it produces her as an elite, you know, San Francisco Black, brown woman who's going to impose this agenda that has nothing to do with you, and she's going to abandon you, and she's going to undermine your way of life. And, you know, that was clever on their part. It was massively unjust. And, you know, I would like to see a certain kind of a socialism in the US can only mean kind of basic social democracy of the Bernie kind. But even that, you know, like we do need a kind of resurgence of that in a new way. And I'm hoping that another generation of politicians will be able to take that up.
Yeah, the city.
Did Judith Butler just say overtly that she thinks that we need socialism in the United States? Judith forgot that the internet is a thing and people in the United States can hear her talks in the UK.
Like to see a certain kind of a socialism in the US can only mean kind of basic social democracy of the Bernie kind. But even that, you know, like we do need a kind of resurgence of that in a new way. And I'm hoping that another generation of politicians will be able to take that up.
Yeah, there's certainly an inspiring signs in that regard. I just want to finally talk about Palestine. I just want to talk about that finally with you. I mean, first, in terms, I mean, look, the West has facilitated being complicit in all sorts of heinous crimes throughout history. I just wonder what you think in terms of this is a crime which is so confessed to and by its perpetrators in a way which is, I mean, when I, interviewed an Israeli American associate professor at Holocaust Genocide Study towards the beginning, he said it's actually very rare. States normally go to great lengths to cover up their intent. But also evidenced as it happened, partly thanks to social media, mobile phones, that kind of thing. I'm just interested in the impact of that, actually, in terms of, because it kind of normalizes. I mean, there were lots of, obviously, those who are fighting very strongly against this genocide, but it has kind of normalized a form of just extraordinary barbarism, which people obviously can see with their own eyes and hit. But I mean, it's. Do you see what I'm getting at? Yeah, it's this kind of normalization of, but I don't believe in the Whiggish view of history that we're towards enlightenment and liberty and as the years go on, things improve. Obviously, that was buried in Auschwitz, Birkenau, and before that the Somme. But there is something quite disturbing about this level of depravity and how it can be tolerated in full broad daylight. And what's your thoughts about the consequences?
Yes, well. Look, I think if you listen carefully to to what some of the right-wing members of Knesset say, or the internal members of Netanyahu's government, or the generals, very often you do hear the idea that these people, Palestinians, if they're even called that, deserve what they got. They're all Hamas. They committed atrocities. As long as they are still on that land, we will be threatened existentially. Any act of bombardment or killing is therefore justified. And indeed, the killing becomes a kind of joyous celebration of self-defense and where self-defense means is defined by this idea that Israel will only be defended if it obliterates this other people. So annihilation and eliminationism becomes a condition of being truly self-defended.
Yeah, that's actually a good
safe.
point. I agree with Judith.
I had an Israeli friend,
I don't like, but
many years, a friend who wrote to me, how can you sign this petition for a ceasefire? Don't you know that the minute there's a ceasefire, they will come into Tel Aviv and kill us. They will kill me.
Listen, I mean, it might be deeply uncomfortable to admit sometimes when we agree with socialists, but Judith and I have different reasons for being against what Israel is doing. Judith is a radical revolutionary socialist, and she believes that Palestinians are uprising against their socialist oppressors. That is why she is in favor of Palestine. I just think that that it's pretty shitty to kill a bunch of people for their land, and that's why I am against what Israel's doing, because I think they're genociding an entire group of people for their land, but not for the same reasons that Judith does. It's important to have that distinction, but I do actually appreciate that she's saying that, like, Israel is defining the term defense as obliterating an entire race of people. They believe they will only be defended when all the Palestinians are gone. And I agree with that definition.
And this belief is it's more prevalent than people realize. There's obviously a number of Israelis who don't hold to this view and who are critical and who are on the left and are just an enormously underrepresented minority at this moment. But I think that is operative. The other point, I think, is that the hatred and the anti-Palestinian racism is advertised and is promoted as part of the war effort, but also as part of a toxic nationalism that is trying to continue to get support for not just its war against Palestinian life, but its own power, right? So again, stoking enormous fear and hatred for the purposes of celebrating a military vanquishing, which is genocidal in its actions, becomes the way to basically say Israel will not suffer another genocide because we are annihilating those who would annihilate us, and we're doing it in advance this time. And it doesn't understand its own annihilation practices as genocidal. It cannot, it saves that word for its own history, but it will not accept a comparative genocide framework or understand its own actions as technically genocidal according to the Genocide Convention, which it is.
Which is, I mean, that genocidal mentality is often forgotten. This is, I mean, it's one of the most common genocidal tropes. In the Rwandan genocide, the Hutu extremists said that if we don't kill them, they will kill us.
I can't tell you how often it is said to me by Israelis who challenge me for my views. And again, I'm not making a generalization about Israelis. I don't actually believe there is one point of view there, but there is a pro-war point of view that is deeply committed to that notion.
In terms of just a couple of final things on Palestine, in terms of free speech, because Donald Trump and JD Vance have wrapped themselves in the garbs of free speech and now are obviously throttling funding to educational institutions, including Columbia, basically for not cracking down enough on pro-Palestine demonstrations, which is ludicrous because Columbia really victimized its students, yes. But also deporting, they're beginning to deport green card holders yes. who've been involved in those protests. What is just Trumpism, authoritarian ideology turn reality on its head. That's what they always do. But just what's your thoughts on that? Well,
first of all, I think there's a question of whether the Trump administration wants to make an example of some key protesters in order to frighten people, or whether it really has a systematic detention and deportation plan for non-citizens who protest the Israeli actions in Gaza. And I'm not sure. It has now published not just the 10 primary universities where they claim there is anti-Semitic protest going on. Not a protest against anti-Semitism, but a protest that is itself anti-Semitic. But another 60 or so institutions have recently been named. And of course, it shoots fear into those institutions, all of which are to one degree or another dependent on federal funding, and which Trump is claiming he can withdraw or suspend if they don't comply with his detention and deportation effort. So this puts all of these universities in a situation where they have to decide whether they're going to be complicit and hand over their students or their community members, or whether they're going to refuse to implement. And interestingly enough, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about what non-implementation would imply.
This is exactly what I said was going to happen. This is exactly what I said. Are there universities that have functions that are entirely dependent on federal funding? Yes. However, I really think that a lot of the universities, and particularly among the Ivy Leagues where they have these massive endowments, like, you guys don't understand, like, universities, a lot of them have just like massive pots of cash in terms of endowments, in terms of property holdings, in terms of just like all this stuff that they have to own as a university that you don't really think about. And like, just think about the sheer, like, take your average university in a city. Think about the sheer number of buildings that university has to own in order to operate. Like, the most valuable asset that Harvard has is not the endowment. It's not all like the stuff they have trademarked. It's the massive amount of property that Harvard owns in downtown Boston, like that, and Cambridge, and the surrounding areas of Boston. They own a shit ton of really expensive property. The reason I bring this up is I have said from the beginning that I think there's going to be more than a couple of these universities that basically tell the Trump administration to go shove it. Now, what does that mean? It means they get their federal funding pulled. They get their $400 million in grants pulled. Okay, that sucks for Columbia. And Columbia does seem to be working with them. So Columbia is trying to get that stuff restored. So I'm not saying them as a specific example. But take, like, does Harvard actually need to work with the Trump administration? Or can they tell the Trump administration to fuck off? Does the University of Chicago actually need to work with the Trump administration? Or can they say, we will take this financial hit because we know we have the resources to withstand it, and we also know that if we don't bend the knee to you, we get to say and do whatever the fuck we want. And it seems Judith seems to be saying that there are those conversations happening at universities. Like, do they just tell the administration to go screw? What happens then?
Or how to appear to comply without complying. I mean, we will see all kinds of strategies going on here.
Yeah, or how to fake it.
I think
yeah,
what worries me most, and one can see this in the so-called Project Esther document that was published by the Heritage Foundation. And let's remember, the Heritage Foundation is the one that produced Project 2025, which laid out many of the items that needed to happen, which are now happening with this flurry of executive orders. Okay, but this is what I want to say about Project Esther, and I'm saying it on the eve of Purim. I think it's almost Purim. Mm-hmm. I'm a quasi good Jew.
She's a Jew? Judith Butler is a Jew?
Project Esther claims
I had no idea.
that
it's tonight. It's tonight. Yeah, come on.
It is tonight. Okay, so a good moment to remember that Esther was actually in favor of a liberation that is in no way expressed by the Heritage Foundation. Their claim is that there is a Hamas support network. That's their phrase. And that all of these protests on college campuses are undertaken, protests against Israel are undertaken by Hamas supporters. So if you engage in a protest against Israeli bombardment, tactical starvation, forcible displacement, annihilation, if you protest against those on principled reasons, you will be understood, according to this framework, as a Hamas supporter, right? And it's very hard to get untarred by that charge. I can tell you, I've never supported Hamas, right? But if you say, oh, look, folks, this is a resistance movement, people will say, oh, why are you using that word rather than terrorist? It's like, not because I support it, but because it's descriptive, right? This is not actually even controversially descriptive, but you can't describe using certain language because you will then be Hamas. Like, oh, only a Hamas supporter would say that. Like, oh, what happened to Judith Butler? Now she's, all of this. But having been tarred in that way and having never supported Hamas, I'm now seeing everybody is being tarred. That every form of protest is eligible to be tarred with the allegation that you support Hamas, you're part of a Hamas support network. So, for instance, the young man Khalil, who is now detained in Louisiana, he's never said anything about Hamas. There's no evidence at all that he actually supported Hamas.
No.
Right? He led a student protest, or one of the leaders of a student protest. And it's the protest itself which is now being construed as pro-Hamas. So once that happens, and this is really important to underscore, even full citizens, he had a green card, right? Which gives him nearly all the same rights and obligations of citizens. But even citizens who are who are tarred or branded as pro-Hamas can be labeled as domestic enemies of the U.S. They can be detained, they can be imprisoned, and that is on the horizon. I'm not saying it will happen, but it can happen under this new aegis supplied by the Heritage Foundation and adopted by the Trump administration. And we need to become extremely alert, not because the lives of citizens are more valuable than non-citizens, but because everybody who is protesting may well find that their legitimate constitutional rights or human rights, as the case may be, can be suspended and eliminated.
And just very finally, I mean, what's your thoughts on Trump posing or wrapping this up? Donald Trump, with all his associations, all his rhetoric, all his history, as about Jewish safety. He's protecting Jewish safety and fighting anti-Semitism and fighting racism. That's his approach. That's what he's claiming. Well, a number of Jewish scholars and activists have openly objected to this. There's a great petition by Not in Our Name, If Not Now, Jewish Voice for Peace. Scholars like Mariana Hirsch and others have written compelling pieces to say Jewish values are not linked with the Trump administration. They don't need his paternalistic protection. That knocking on somebody's door at 5 a.m. and detaining them for having exercised a legitimate right of protest. I mean, that's an echo of a state intrusion that takes us back to Nazism and the persecution of the Jews. There's part of the Jewish population, a good part of the Jewish population in the U.S. that's always been in favor of civil rights, of basic free speech and freedom of assembly. And, Jews were also disproportionately persecuted under the McCarthy era, where they were suspected of being un-American, right? Which is an anti-Semitic trope. Like, oh, if you're Jewish, you have a loyalty to another place. You don't really belong. You're not really American. You have to provide your credentials. You're probably a communist looking to undermine. So we've suffered. We've suffered that kind of persecution. What would it mean for us to line up behind that kind of persecution? That would be to undermine some of the most important ethical and political principles of Jewish life in the 20th and 21st century. Brilliant stuff, as ever. Judith, it's been such an honour to speak to you again. Hopefully, the next time I speak to you, there won't be an ever deeper descent into darkness. Although, who can say?
We have to expand our solidarities and get our vision together, right?
Yeah, expand our solidarities, Judith.
Yeah, quickly.
Solidarity.
Exactly, very quickly. I think speed is definitely priority. But do everyone who's afraid of gender is now out in paperback.
Yes.
Do make sure you get a copy, everyone. Do share the video, press like.
All right, that seems to be it. Well, that was a really productive. I mean, listen, are we now responsible for watching everything Judith Butler says in public? Because we got some great clips out of this. So I will be working on getting those clips online, obviously. That is a priority now because she just said every quiet part out loud. So guys, keep an eye out for interviews with Judith Butler. Let's make sure we're looking into them. And hopefully Judith just keeps talking and talking and talking and yapping and yapping and yapping. And hopefully we can just continue to clip and clip and clip. And then all of a sudden, one day before you know it, J.K. Rowling's going to be retweeting this stuff. And it's going to be all and it'll be beautiful. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. Now, as a reminder, my recommendation, if you have some time on your hands, is that you head over to the Red Menace Collective. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com, and you check out the latest the thing that I always work on that turns into that starts as a little baby project that's just something I'm screwing around with, and then all of a sudden turns into a book before you know it. I'm in a book writing mood. I'm in a book writing zone. I am not deviating from this path because apparently I have a lot to say, and currently the things that I have to say are coming out in the form of a dystopian fairy tale called The Communist Manifesto, a revolutionary fairy tale. And the first 3 acts are online now, and it might be one of the best things I've ever written, and I'm really proud of it, and I think it's a really good story. And I'm working on the last 2 acts now. Act 4 will definitely go up tonight. Act 5 is going to be up before the week is over. That is the full story there, and I hope you guys like it as much as I have enjoyed creating it. And I would love your feedback. And guys, when you get to Acts 4 and 5, can we all just do a solid and no spoilers? It is killing me not to talk about where the story is going, okay? It is killing me. I know where the story is going. I wrote the fucking story. But if you get to the parts of the story, and you are going to know when those parts are, no spoilers. Don't ruin it. Part of this story is an immersive, emotional experience. At least that's what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I'm actually doing it well or not. That is what I'm trying to do. An immersive, emotional experience in which you follow the communist revolution to its peak and its inevitable descent. Okay? So don't tell anyone. Loose lips sink ships. Snitches get stitches. All that stuff. No spoilers. But you can check that out at redmenacecollective.substack.com. And I will be back tomorrow, and we'll do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club tomorrow. We're going to finish up the Against the Gender Nightmare tomorrow. So if you need to catch up on Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, head over to the Substack and do that. And we will finish Against the Gender Nightmare tomorrow. And it'll be amazing. And I think that's all I have. Hang on. That's all I have. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.